Okay, so Indigo and I had recorded a video together just now actually that came out to be like 20 minutes long, and we were able to rebound off of each other pretty well, but it turns out that the audio didn't sync up somehow. So we're just going to be respectively, filming our own individual pieces. We have enough information, both of us, to be able to do that. So I wanted to start out by stating that, as Professor Juris had stated in the review video from the other day, we're basically about like halfway through this narrative. And so far, we've heard about the social, political, and economic factors that preceded the actual protesting. And chapter 7 is really the point where we delve into the nitty gritty of the actual protests, which went on for 68 days. And the first bit of information that I wanted to talk about was how Sapranzetti decides to kind of go further in depth about the fact that mobility, not even in the sense of, movement, how much that had a major impact on the success of this protest, but also the fact that, these were literal movement through locations were literal life and death moments. That was like one of the biggest things that I took away from this chapter. And how throughout Bangkok and Thailand, there are these distinct sections that have been deemed either red or yellow districts. And red districts were kind of safe places for these protesters to go through bearing their signage and political regalia that explain their position and purpose, whereas the yellow districts, they were kind of more apprehensive of doing so, and it was more dangerous, literally to the point where they could, die and get killed as a result of showing their intentions and political affiliations. So the yellow districts would result in the protesters kind of hiding and putting away their vests and political signs, and stuff like that. And so this part kind of reminded me, I was able to bring it back home to the United States, and how, like, Democrats and Republicans in certain locations, it can be really difficult, if not life threatening, to align yourself with a certain political party. And, you know, life and death, but also on a lower scale. Like, it can be about political ostracization. No, that's not the word. But like microaggressions and kind of being exiled or, looked at strangely, from opposing sides politically. And also, it's a major thing for race, like in the South, it's really dangerous in some states, and in some cities and towns and, counties and stuff for black and brown communities. Some people, there, have been literal books published, like I think it was the Green Book, not the movie, but like the movie was loosely based on the thing, like the actual phenomenon of like books existing that were kind of like travel guides for black and brown citizens to be able to use when they were traveling through the South in order to understand which towns were and were not sundown towns, which would be dangerous for them to be out in public after the sun set. So like kind of making those cross-cultural connections, like for some, like it's just really dangerous to be, out about political affiliation, sexual orientation, life goals and intentions and race and all this other stuff. But also in this chapter, we see that continuation of kind of like this narrative. Sapranzetti is really good at kind of interweaving, nonfiction information and these life stories of these different characters that were present throughout the protests. And, we see more of, I don't want to butcher the name, but Obito and Adun, and Oboto is he's like one of the members of the group that would kind of lead the caravan throughout the protests. They would dictate speed, direction, and they would help protect the main, section of the protests. And someone like Adun, who was responsible for these people who were coming in from rural areas, who didn't really know the city as much as the other protesters. People like him would be responsible for, guiding, and, uh, assisting people in getting through this urban grid system. And to play off of that, there were people from rural countrysides in Thailand who were coming and joining the red shirts, because the red shirts, while there were people in that specific group, protesters did not explicitly consist of them. There were also, people from farms and rural areas. There were people that knew people that were red shirts that wanted to help support them. There were many different groups and sections that came in and wanted to stand for this cause, which I think is really interesting. That's like crucial. And it sucks because, despite this solidarity and cohesion, the actual execution of the protest was pretty lackluster. Communication was difficult to maintain along the winding protest routes. In the text, it says blockades and partitions were neither clear nor discreet. Events were chaotic, they overlap, and the overall tactical approach to the red shirt protests was pretty amateur, I would say. And that's really disappointing, because you see this great solidarity among all these different communities trying to fight against this greater capitalistic machine that is the Thai Thai army. And it was just close. It was just close enough for them to be able to carry out this great movement. And they did, in a way, become martyrs and become, this symbol of standing up against oppression. But also, it's like a movie. Like, you wish that they met that goal that they had when they first started. So another major note was that, we finally get to see the actual term owners of the map, which is the title. We finally get to see that, in reference to the protesters. Due to the perfect access to the urban layout of Bangkok, these protesters were kind of always going to be, or let me say that the motor taxi drivers, I feel, were always going to be the ones that acted as the catalyst for this type of protest. They knew the city like the back of their hands. They kind of worked on this underground, invisible level that kind of allowed them to do their organizing and even their protesting in a way that kind of went under the radar of the political elite that they were fighting against. And, they were going to be the ones that were able to, use their title to flood the urban settings and clog mobility, which I think is really honorable. And it reminds me of kind of like ants in an ant farm, when you think of like little tiny ant farms and like the sand and the tunnels and the ants are going through, like those ants know that system, that grid system, because it's the only thing that they do. That's like their thing, and they know it. And these taxi drivers, they know the system, they know the city. We hear about that in earlier chapters. And it's interesting and kind of ironic to see how they take this career that they've kind of been relegated to by the political elite and officials and, Thai powerhouses. You see the taxi drivers take this and turn it into an opportunity. They take it for autonomy and freedom, but they also use it to kind of hit the powerful right back. They're like, you're forcing us to be in this situation, but, you know, we're able to then be those invisible urban connectors. We're able to be those ants in Bangkok and really blow it up from the inside, which I thought was really interesting. And I guess they also kind of, one of the interesting things that I read in this chapter was how there's also mention of how material goods had a relationship with the social relations of Bangkok and the military. Like, people were using high-end fashion goods like Louis Vuitton bags and things like that to shield off the military. And the red shirts were really able to pinpoint and distinctly correlate the Thai army to owners and manufacturers of high-end commodities, and they really are able to say, these are the people that are responsible for the capitalism that's keeping us oppressed. And so, again, we're going to kind of appropriate the goods that they're creating. We're going to appropriate the careers that they're making or forcing people to be into because of, like, how the city works and how the urban layout is. We're going to take that and then use it against them in order to get the best outcome for ourselves. So that leads me to my final point, which is that, you know, Sapranzetti acknowledges that movements such as the red shirt protests, they're so hard to kind of capture and trap in the field of anthropology. Like, it's very hard to study and observe these occurrences from an anthropological standpoint. We've discussed before how, you know, anthropology really is the chronicling of, that's not a word. Anyway, it is the whatever of, you know, life and current history, past history. It really just is the tracking of human behavior. And while that seems like a general umbrella term that could then catch something like this in its definitions, it's really hard to kind of keep in solid words and solid definitions, you know, all of the things that were going on during these kind of protests and this particular protest in Bangkok. You know, there's so much going on in terms of different locations and time, and just people and opinions. Like, there's so much going on, and they're really living, breathing moments where energy and emotion, you know, that can be really hard to kind of put in a book. You know, textbooks tend to kind of turn them into stuffy, overanalyzed and but also generalized phenomenon that, like, a lot of people can't relate to. And I think that Sapranzetti, in the past 7 chapters, like, he's really been able to give a voice to what was going on, even if he can acknowledge that, like, you know, it's hard, you know, it's hard to really just I don't know, but yeah. I don't know, I just thought that this chapter was really cool. I like this chapter. I like the chapters before, but when he really puts you in the center, you know, with pictures and all of that, like, you really feel what's going on. And I think that he deserves credit for that, because a lot of people aren't able to do that and do it correctly. So that was my you know, overview of chapter 7. I hope that helps. Sorry for the delay, but you know, it happens. Hope everyone's doing well and is safe, and is trying to make this really weird time work as best as possible. So thanks for your time, guys.